Hi, Ian. Thank you so much for joining us on our Womb with a View podcast today. Ian is an experienced coach and he founded Inspiring Dads in 2018, helping dads to balance work and fatherhood. He also co-hosts his own podcast, which is called Lockdown Dads, and he contributes to many panel discussions concerning working dads. Ian is married and he has two children, an 11-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old son. Welcome, Ian. Thank you so much again for joining us. And Leanne is going to kick us off with our first question.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Ian. So, what were the factors that led you to start your business, Inspiring Dads?
I think first and foremost, there was an element of being a dad. And when I first became a dad, we took a quite a sort of non-traditional division of labour, I guess, in the sense that I stopped work altogether and became a stay-at-home dad. I worked 4 days a week after my daughter was born in 2010 as well. And then for 9 months, it was full-time. It was just me. My wife was out to work. And then after that, I was on a 2-day-a-week basis of work and 3 days with my daughter. And I was working as a management consultant, and that wasn't particularly sustainable. I was looking for something that I could do on a long-term basis. My wife was being coached through a women's leadership development course in her work, and she said, this coaching that I'm experiencing at the moment is very similar to some of the things that you've really enjoyed from management consultancy. Maybe there's something long-term here that you could do. Because one of the challenges I had was I was working away from home when I worked as a consultant frequently, not all the time, but most of the time, sort of Monday to Thursday, and my wife was working very long hours as a lawyer. We didn't have family around, and one of us needed to be around for the kids in some form or other. So I was looking for a career path that would allow me to do the things that I really enjoyed, which was working with people, fundamentally helping them to solve problems, but would also fit around kind of school pressures. And so Inspiring Dads came out of quite a pragmatic decision, but also an element of matching up my interests with a recognition that actually the sweet spots for me when I was learning to coach were guys kind of very similar to me in many ways, as it often the way these things start off being, who were struggling to some degree with being pulled in different directions, wanting to be a great dad, but also wanting to have a successful career. And so that's how Inspiring Dads came about.
It's very interesting. It's because it's obviously, a lot of the stuff that we do, as you say, it's trying to create that sense of work-life balance and be able to be good at both. And you always feel, well, in my household, certainly, it always feels that the higher earner in our household obviously is the one that gets priority when you're thinking about homeschooling and stuff like that. But actually, if you're both working, there has to be some kind of solution, even when the kids are at school, because it's pickups, as you say, it's drop-offs, it's when the schools are off on inset, it's a kind of working together, isn't it? It is difficult.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to communication for me, Leanne. I think you've got to create a sort of shared purpose and a shared direction. I think too often men, in my experience, are guilty of forging their own path, very identity built around their workplace success. And actually, when we look at the proportion of mums with dependent children, I think it's around about 75% of mums with dependent children work. Now, there'll be a gender pay gap of some description in one way or the other within those relationships. It's unlikely that everyone's going to be earning exactly the same. And in our relationship, when I met my wife, she was earning maybe 50% more than me when we first met. So quite a considerable gap, and it's only ever got bigger, I think. Did it get smaller? It might have got smaller at one stage, but certainly there are some practical elements, I think, in terms of finances that do come into play in terms of whose career kind of gets protected. I think we've seen that in the pandemic, and that's one of the difficulties. But it's not exclusively, it should never be exclusively one person's responsibility to do childcare and certainly, or to be the breadwinner. I think a blended approach and being open and honest about the pressures is what's really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's quite interesting that you said that you were the unconventional a few years ago when you were the one that stood back and with a stay-at-home dad. And I think even now, to I guess that's also partly of what you're doing to make it that it isn't unconventional, that it can just be the norm, just that it is for women to have the extended maternity leave. Why can't it be the same for men to have the extended paternity leave and do that same thing? So I thought that was quite interesting that you said that.
Yeah, I think it's really important to normalize the opportunities for everyone. We've spent, society has spent a lot of time in the last 20, 30 years, maybe 20 years, I guess. 30, well, probably 30 actually. I'm thinking, how old am I?
I know, it's time.
How long is this sort of thing has been going on for? But in terms of enabling and supporting women to progress in their careers, regardless of whether they have children or not, and to remove some of that sense that actually only men are the breadwinners, only women are the carers. And actually what you're seeing in generationally is a shift towards much greater numbers of men wanting to be active and involved fathers and wanting to have it all in some ways, and facing some of those pressures that I think have traditionally been something that women have faced, and finding that some of the societal structures that we have at the moment don't really support a more of a hybrid, more of a blended approach where
Absolutely.
men have the opportunity to access and to share that part of their lives, and it's becoming more and more important. But men do face pressures in accessing it, which is why having men and women, being open and honest about what people want to achieve is really, really important, and understanding that men do want to be involved.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, as you say, the last 30 years, because I think in my parents' generation, things were very different. And, I still get kind of my dad, saying, I never changed a nappy. No, it wasn't, I never did that. And it's so different now because, I know, but it's like, that we're not with my husband now, obviously, we share so much of the responsibility. And as you said, it's very uncommon now that in current women and what they want to achieve is that they don't work. A lot of women have, just as you said, they bring in high incomes as well, and they want to go back to work, and they don't always want to be, as you said, be given those conventional roles. So time's changing, and as you said, things have to adapt to make those challenges be met, really.
Absolutely.
Okay, so next question. In your professional experience, because we've been doing this a long time, what do you see as the biggest problem that new dads face?
I think the biggest problem is being pulled in different directions and feeling like they can't succeed in any of them. So I often represent it as a diamond. So with a sort of the individual in the middle, and then you've got this sense of being great at work, being a perfect partner, being a great dad, and time for yourself. And those four pressures pulled in different directions. And some of those elements, certainly the sort of great dad bit, isn't necessarily facilitated within most workplaces. That's, there is, regardless of how many times I have this conversation with people who believe the same thing that you do, there are still, which is very easy to get blindsided by the fact that not everyone thinks in the same way that you do. I think, the danger of some of these challenges around gender equality is that it can become an echo chamber. But there are certainly men who face the discrimination and judgment around, this whole idea, can't your wife do this? And this kind of attitude sort of, I think, prevails a lot of workplaces still, is that there are expectations about who does what within a relationship, and caring responsibilities fall to women, and men don't feel, and men certainly where you're in a relationship where the man might be the primary breadwinner for a variety of sort of long-standing social reasons, then the man fears stepping away from that and showing a different side for the concern for what sort of commitment that shows to his business. So I think that puts it under pressure, and so that element of not necessarily being taken seriously, and then men themselves fearing that they'll be sidelined within the workplace.
Yeah, it's funny because when you say it like that, you think, I guess we underestimate, what goes on and how people react to things. But yeah, I think it's absolutely right. I think so many people just in our own social community, it's very rare that I do see the dad being the kind of the carer more than the female. So it's obviously still, would you say in your opinion, it's still quite a minority of men that do that, or do you think it's massively changing now?
I think it's a minority. I think more and more, the more stories that men tell, the more stories that there's a lady called Dr. Jasmine Kelland, who is a researcher at University of Plymouth, and she coined the phrase the F it fathers, the fathers who aren't afraid to put themselves out there and say, actually, F this. This is part of my identity. I'm going to lead on this. Men who take opportunities to take extended parental leave have definitely increased, certainly off the back initially of the Lib Dems sort of pushing for that in government in terms of shared parental leave policies, which they're kind of flawed, but and they're very difficult to access, they're complicated. But a lot of sort of kind of major sort of blue chip companies have then, off the back of that, have equalized their parental leave, and they're treating parents the same. So more and more dads are getting the opportunity, but there's still an element of societal pressure, and it comes from both angles. There's pressure for women about what motherhood looks like and what being a good mum looks like, and it almost certainly doesn't involve, those stereotypes almost certainly don't involve leaving your child with the husband who may or may not be competent and going back to work and abandoning your children. That narrative is as damaging for women as it is for men, and I think that's one of the big challenges, is to change the narrative. And the more and more men who talk about it, more likely it is that other men feel like it's a legitimate choice.
Yeah, absolutely. And what would you like to see companies do to promote gender equality in the workplace then? What would you think they need to do to kind of create some of this change?
Yeah, I think there's 5 things that they need to do. They need to look at flexible working for everyone, and flexible working from day one. So jobs that are advertised as being open to flexible working. When Zurich and the government behavioural insight team did some work last year, pre-pandemic, they found that it was equally as likely, the increase of men versus women who applying for flexible working jobs is equally likely that men were going to apply for those jobs as it was that women were. So suggesting that actually flexible working is attractive to men if you open up those doors. And also clearly it's a powerful enabler for anyone who has caring responsibilities, but also men were taking it up, even though we don't necessarily assume that that's their priority. Very easy to do that. Equalizing parental leave, it's not the cheapest thing in the world, but that's a very strong signal that businesses can do. I strongly believe, obviously, that coaching and mentoring matters, supporting dads through that emotional change so that they can be the person they want to be and need to be. It's a well-being, it's a performance issue. If you can support dads in the same way that possibly you support mums. Dads don't have those networks in quite the same way, and often dads don't feel like they have anyone to talk to. So supporting coaching and mentoring, whether it's internal or with external specialist help, is important. Senior fatherhood role models. This is probably the single biggest thing that businesses can do, is identify and promote and tap into men who are more senior in a business, showing that flexible working is available. And it's not just, it can't just be a perk for senior leadership. It can't just be about going to the golf course on a Friday afternoon and and smoothing with the clients and doing whatever. It has to be open and it has to be available for everyone. But that's a really, really powerful way of individuals to look up the business, dads to say, actually, there are other men who I seek to be like, positions of authority that I would like to be in, who are also parents, they're fathers, they're showing that it's okay. So that's really important. And anything that businesses can do to connect dads with dads on a kind of community and social basis and talk about fatherhood in the context of work and demystify some of this. Men are very good at creating silos. You go to you go for drinks after work. When we can go for drinks after work, men, I'm as guilty as anyone. I have different groups of friends who I will talk about different topics with largely, and we won't cross over. So men are very good at saying, right, family life part, and work life taken on. You only have to look at some of the challenges that men talk about, in particular about losing the commute, and how that commute time is a transition between work and home life, and the pressures that they felt not being able to commute, to know that it's because they're not bringing their whole self. They're a work person in work. Anything you can do to help men to bring their whole selves, I think, is really important as well. So those are my 5.
They're really interesting points.
Yeah.
A lot of businesses take on actually a lot of what you've said. I know that interesting about that commute that you just mentioned, that obviously in this last year when my husband's been obviously working from home, and he said the hardest thing that, as much as it's wonderful to be at home now and see the kids more and have, be at home from 5 o'clock, 5:30, rather than 7 o'clock running in, saying goodnight to the kids, and that's it until the weekend. He said that's been wonderful, but it has been a very difficult transition to not have that time to kind of just calm down for 45 minutes on the train, to and from work, to, suddenly just be having a hectic day, to suddenly rushing into playing, Cluedo with the kids is like, okay, where's my time just to calm down? And I immediately thought, well, hold on, I do that all the time. I work.
Really unsympathetic.
And then I was unsympathetic, and I admit that I was like, well, hold on, what do you think I've been doing for the last 7 years? But actually, that's not something that he was kind of used to, and now it's fine, and now he's got onto it. But actually, it does take some time to discuss that as well, and see the challenges that different people face, and how then as a couple you are then going to manage that.
Yeah, I saw something on LinkedIn today, a man called Rob Taylor, who's been on our podcast before, and he has an organisation called Dads in Business based up in Sheffield, and they did some information, a bit of research last year, and they found, and one of the headline that he put out today was from that. It said 87% of dads felt stress and anxiety about working from home, and I kind of was surprised at what the other 13% were doing, to be honest, because actually in the current circumstances, men are being exposed to a different type of environment, and so they're not necessarily comfortable doing. And I think that's probably a good thing for empathy, for the future, and for people doing things differently, and working towards more of a hybrid model where you can be a great dad and also have a great career.
I think so. And I think although the pandemic has been obviously horrific for so many reasons, I think the flexible working that you were talking about, I think this has given a bit more of an open path for that, because some people's offices are closed now, and people are taking ownership of their own flexible hours because just by default they're working at home. But yeah, as Laura said, it's hard for all roles to adapt. Sometimes, as in our household, for example, I'm not used to having my husband here all the time, and he's not used to being here, so it's a whole big process. So certainly when you've got the kids here as well, and then you've got homeschooling. So but in that capacity, do you think that all these factors are going to help kind of clear the path for a bit more flexibility, because we've seen it can work?
I think so. Cautiously optimistic, I think, Leanne. I think that you need to put aside some of the sort of mood music from, people like the chief exec of Goldman Sachs, who said it's an aberration. Flexible working is that working from home is an aberration. This version of working from home is an aberration. No one would choose, if you have young children, no one would choose to work in this way. This isn't, I've worked from home for 11, 12 years, pretty much continuously. And you'd never choose to do it in this way. It's not something you do. And I think despite, and a lot of the research, a great article in The Guardian a week or so ago, a man called Tom Lamont had written a piece, and it was about men realizing how difficult the challenges were of running a family and balancing work, fatherhood, work and home, really, in this sense. Actually, the pandemic had opened their eyes, and had lots of men who said, well, this isn't perfect, but there's lots here that I really want to hang on to. And I really hope that as we move back into challenges around what the workplace and what the work patterns look like, that we will hang on to the fact that actually it's democratized a lot of the challenges in work, and actually working remotely allows everyone you don't need to be able to get into the office to be able to do a great job. And you can be flexible, and everything is possible. And I think hopefully enough men, and the onus is on men to push back sometimes, say, actually, you know, I'm not going to go back into the office 5 days a week because I've got these other responsibilities that are important to me as well. And if enough people stand up and say, this is important and we're all aligned with this, we take away some of that, you know what, it's optional. I'm a man, you know, someone else will always pick it up. Usually that means their female partner, if they're in a heterosexual relationship, someone else will pick this up. And if we can push back, it's actually, yes, someone else could do this for me because, you know, I earn more, therefore I'm protected within our family dynamics, but it's important to me. And if enough men push back, enough dads push back and say, actually, I don't want to go back to how it was, then we will see change. Whether it'll come quite as quickly, I don't know, but it certainly fast tracks some of the desire that we've already seen, I think, in society more generally for flexible remote and remote working.
Yeah.
Okay, our final question. We mentioned before that you also do a series of your own excellent podcasts, Lockdown Dads, and you're also on lots of discussion panels. What or who has been the biggest impact on you?
I was having a think about this, and it's a little bit like choosing your favorite child in some ways. It's kind of hard to do, but so James Miller is my co-host on Lockdown Dads, and I came across James right at the start of when I'd first launched the business, and I was listening to a podcast called First Time Dads, and it's a couple of journalists from the Mirror, and we actually had one of them, Steve Mail, on our show from America, where he now lives, and he came on Lockdown Dad's show. But I listened and I heard James talking about his book, which was Dads Don't Babysit. And I thought it was really, really interesting. And it tied in really closely with what I believed. And so I went and bought it. And I will put a review on Amazon. I then found him on Twitter and I tagged him on the review. I said, I've read this book of yours. I think it's brilliant. It's like and basically what I said is it's basically like all my ideas, but just written in a much better way. And it's sort of the Bible that I had when I first started the business. And it turned out he doesn't live too far away from me. He said, do you want to meet up a coffee and discuss the ideas in the book and stuff? So we did. And then we've been collaborating ever since. So James Miller would be the person who probably has the most significance. But there's lots of amazing people I've met.
I love that term, babysitting. I remember my husband said it once when I went out for dinner. When I'm babysitting, I was like, and then one of my friends was like, you're not babysitting your own children. But it's just a term that we'd never use, like, well, I would never use about looking after my own children. But again, I think that is, I think he was doing it to wind me up, I think, more than anything.
Maybe.
Wow, it's been really amazing speaking to you.
Yeah.
You have some really interesting, amazing things to share. And we're really grateful that you joined us on our podcast. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
We really appreciate it.
Thank you both. It's been a delight. It's been a pleasure to talk about it. Thank you for inviting me.